Hmm.
Okay.
Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion Podcast. This podcast is a program of the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programs to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Associate Executive Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at the AAVMC. Today's show is a part 2 in a series on holistic admissions. If you missed last show with Tim DeBrew from the American Dental Education Association, you should definitely check that show out. It is available on YouTube. But today, I'm delighted to welcome Drs. Jenny Hodgson, Jackie Pelzer, and Linda Lord from Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine and the Ohio State University's School of Veterinary Medicine, respectively. Both of these institutions have seen significant growth in the number of students of color enrolled in their professional programs. So I've invited them to come on and talk about how they've achieved this growth. Did it impact other sectors of diversity, and what seems to be on the horizon for their institutions with respect to admissions policies and practices? So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
I'm delighted that you're here. So we're going to start with Dr. Lord. Linda, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Ohio State?
Thank you. So I'm the Associate Dean for the professional program here, which means all things student and curriculum fall under me, and one of those areas is obviously admissions, which is why I'm here today.
Great. Wonderful. And the folks at Virginia, Maryland.
So,
Jenny?
I'm Jenny Hodgson, and I'm the Associate Dean for Professional Programs here at Virginia, Maryland, and like Linda, have oversight of all things to do with students, the curriculum, and also admissions. But I am very fortunate to also have an offsider who works very close, who I work very closely with, and that's Dr. Pelzer.
Hi, I'm Jackie Pelzer. I'm Director of Admissions and Student Affairs here at Virginia, Maryland, and I have oversight of the admissions process.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So why don't we just dive right on in. So tell us, Linda, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about how the admissions process is laid out currently at Ohio State?
So I think we're like a lot of schools in that we have gone most definitely more towards a holistic review and trying to really look at our applicants as a whole with the goal of really trying to recruit not only the best and the brightest, but most importantly, I think, is to have a really diverse class that represents society. I think this year made some changes to be much more intentional about our approach to diversity, and so we have an admissions committee like most folks, and we have initial screenings that we look at related to academics, and then we have a holistic look at the file and then go to the interview process, which we weight pretty heavily here. So I know we're going to get into more detail, but that's sort of a nutshell of the areas we look at.
Okay. And at Virginia, Maryland?
Lisa, yeah, I think it's a very, very similar process to what Linda described. We've, again, we have an admissions committee, quite large committee, and we do an academic ranking. We have de-emphasized academics over the years. It used to be a huge percentage of our process, but we have lowered that percentage. Still relevant to the admissions process. But we have identified specific characteristics and traits that our committee will review for each application. We actually review all applications. We no longer have a GPA cutoff, a minimum GPA to apply here to this program.
And then we use that committee review and also that academic record to rank for interviews, and then we interview a certain number through the MMI process. And the other thing that we do is we set that score at 0 before that interview process and then select entirely off the MMI.
Okay, all right. So why don't we keep the questions going? If you are watching live, and we do have some live viewers, please feel free to drop your question into the event page on your Google page there, and I will be happy to share those questions with our guests. So for Ginny and Jackie, can you tell us a little bit about maybe how things have changed maybe in the last, I guess, 5 or more years, however, whatever that time frame is that you've kind of seen some big changes in the way that you do admissions?
So Jenny and I actually started around the same time, and again, very fortunate to have her support and the dean's support at the time. I guess I was, when I went through school actually here at this program, I was very traumatized by my interview process here. It was a panel interview, and I clearly recall some of my fellow or colleagues that were interviewing at the time, they might have come out crying from the interview, or they had very different questions than I had. And I guess that just resonated or left an impact on me, that I felt like it really wasn't a very structured or objective process. So when I started this job, that was really one of the things that I wanted to see a change in the admissions process. And so we began looking at literature, and we found several articles, journal articles on the multiple mini interview, and really made an evidence-based decision to implement that interview process in 2010. And I think that was been the biggest change since we actually started in our admissions process.
And I think also too, changing how we what emphasis we give in that whole interview process. And so as Jackie mentioned, de-emphasizing academics, not saying that academics aren't important, but not saying that they are the most important thing. So de-emphasizing that academics and understanding that there are other attributes that candidates can bring forward, and so trying to consider those more holistically.
So you've been this for 6, so what has the impact been?
Yeah, so, you know, certainly I believe that we have diversified our classes because of the multiple mini interview. We're interviewing more candidates than we did historically prior to the multiple mini interview. And it's difficult to measure, and I hope that someday we can develop a tool to measure it, but the feeling from our faculty is that they're actually teaching a different type of student than we traditionally had. And not to say that when I went through that we were not capable in these different competencies that we can talk about later. It's just that I think we've created a diverse learning environment by bringing in students with different life experiences.
And we don't have the exact numbers in front of us, but we do know that the proportion of students entering the class from diverse backgrounds, including different racial backgrounds, different ethnicities, but also too, we have more males entering the program now, and that can be considered diversity in veterinary education. We also have more students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and so we try to be broadly, and we try to really broaden that diversity as well, and consider those when we're looking at you know, the results of this change process.
Sure. So if folks were to look at some of our data on our website under public data, you'll see that Virginia, Maryland is currently, I think, about the 6th most racially and ethnically diverse campus, with last year's enrollment being about 22%.
And for us, that was, even though that's certainly not where we'd like to be, given Virginia's cultural and racial mix, is certainly a lot better than it was, and we had struggled in the past to recruit diverse students to this campus, because we're in a very rural southwest part of Virginia, and so it was really trying to get students to feel that they were comfortable on this campus and that they were welcomed into our college was another really big thing. You know, it's one thing to interview the students, but they have to accept your offers, and so we've also worked really hard at making it a very welcoming process when they come in to interview.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Are you still there, Linda? And Lisa.
We're all back. Okay. Apologies for that. Technical difficulty there. I was saying, and I think that you were responding that you're seeing a lot of different kinds of diversity at the institution, and while the demographics of Virginia and certainly also Maryland, which you serve, both states, may be still quite a bit different. 22% is still, it is above our national average within veterinary medicine by quite a bit. So that's certainly noteworthy. So what's going on at Ohio State, Linda?
Yeah, I think
what are you all doing?
It's interesting because while we do some things differently than Virginia, I think a lot of the things that we value or look at are very similar. I've been in this job for now 5 years, and we use behavioral interviewing. So it's a structured interview, but a little bit of a different approach than multi-mini interviews. And we've done that for some time and have training that all interviewers are required to do. I think when I took the job, we were really teetering in terms of our diversity numbers, not really moving the needle very much, and we were fortunate to have our new dean, Rustin Moore, come on board about a year ago. And diversity is one of his biggest goals for the college in many respects, not just looking at diversity in terms of underrepresented minorities, but across the spectrum, as Jenny talked about. And so I think some of the changes that we made this year in terms of being very intentional around diversity started all the way from the dean giving a charge to the admissions committee about the value of diversity. We instituted in all of our training of both, we have file reviewers and interviewers, and we instituted training around using the Harvard implicit bias test. Our associate dean for diversity and inclusion put together a PowerPoint that everybody was required to watch. And then we actually made sure that we were looking at diversity explicitly in the file review process to decide who we would take to interviews. And then certainly in the file review also making sure we consider things around diversity. Even can be inherent, it can also be acquired, community service. What kind of experiences does an applicant have to maybe expose themselves to a world outside of their own? So we've looked at it very broadly, and I think it's been interesting. We've also even emphasized it. Our dean will mention it at our admissions dinners. I talk about it in the admissions talk that I do on the day that applicants come to interview. And so exactly what has worked, I don't know, and I don't, I'll be honest, I don't know whether it's a fluke or not, but I will say that this year our numbers are up. We've up about 50% in terms of male students. And we have doubled our underrepresented minority numbers. We'll be at almost 30% this year for our class. So we're thrilled about that. The key will be to see then how we do going forward, and if we continue using similar strategies that we've done, if that continues to help us in those numbers. So we're thrilled and excited to see how things go.
So I've got a couple of follow-up questions. Could you talk a little bit more about the behavioral interview? So it's pretty structured. How is it different? So can you maybe talk a little bit about how it's structured? Multiple mini interviews for folks that are listening. Typically, students are kind of given, or applicants are given a very brief scenario. You're there for a few minutes. You kind of respond to things, and certainly there is some pretty significant training for the interviewers, but tell us a little bit about how that's different, how the process that you're doing is different from multiple mini interviews.
I think the underlying premise with behavioral interviewing is past performance is predictive of future behavior. So we tend to look at, and we certainly tweak it and change it every year, so our questions don't necessarily stay the same, or even the categories that we're looking at. But say, for example, that we want to look at teamwork. Then perhaps you're going to ask a question around, tell us about a time that and maybe you're interested in conflict, right? And so tell us about a time that you worked with a team, what that looked like, and if you had a conflict, how you might have resolved that. I mean, that's just a broad example of what a question might look like. So we try to work with the interviewers on, so there's specific questions, so people are asking the same questions, and then we really have a very detailed rubric about how we score. both in the file review and in the interview, to try to get people on the same page as best we can.
Okay. All right. So, and then for both of you, and I'll keep with Linda for just another couple of minutes, it sounds like the dean played a pretty important role in setting the tone for how your admissions committee would be moving forward, and kind of how training might evolve for that group. Could you tell us a little bit? I mean, certainly this is something that was important to him, not just in terms of color, but talk about a little bit about, I guess, of the dean's interest in this area.
I think that I don't want to speak for Rustin, but I'll say that I think that Rustin recognizes the value and importance, and certainly there's literature that states that when you put together a diverse group of people, they are more productive, they better problem solve, you tend to have better outcomes. And I think he really believes in and values the concept that veterinary medicine shouldn't be the widest profession, that we ought to better mirror and reflect society. But he doesn't just see that in terms of color. I think he sees that in terms of socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, gender. All of those things are really important, right? So that we create this environment of inclusivity that I think what it is inherent that we all should value. And I think that Rustin, that comes up a lot with him in terms of, it's not just about admissions for vet school. It's throughout how he believes that the college should be and how we should reflect society.
Sure. And Virginia, Maryland, I know that that your dean has been there for a few years now, Dr. Cyril Clark, formerly of Oregon, and I know that we've seen some pretty big changes. And one of the things that I thought was most interesting was a few years ago, I guess, after he arrived, that the college's mission, the wording of it changed, and one of the most striking things was that the word diversity was very explicitly added to the college mission. So could you talk a little bit about that and how that happened, and does that have an impact on the way that you approach admissions?
So I mean, one of the reasons why it came about is that we had a COE visit, and so as you know, I'm sure many of you know, that around that time we look at everything that we're doing as a college, and one of the requirements in Standard 1, I think it is our mission statement. And what that was, so it was a really good time for us to sit and look at that mission statement, and it was relatively shortly after Cyril had arrived. So we did look at it, and Cyril did a really good thing in asking the college widely about what we thought should be included in the mission statement. And of course, then Jackie said, well, it's very important to have diversity in there as part of our mission statement. So that's where it got included in the college-wide mission statement. And then additionally to that, Jackie's created a mission statement specifically for the admissions committee that again very explicitly states that commitment to diversity. And I think, as I think that you've implied, Lisa, is that it's really important that this message comes from all levels in a college, and certainly having support of the dean and his strong support in this area makes it then easier to implement policy changes in the college. Mm-hmm. Would you add anything to that, Jackie?
I also think, though, that having the statement regarding diversity in our college mission statement certainly legally supports our admissions review process. And with the recent Supreme Court decision, I'm very proud to say that we have that word diversity in our mission statement, so that really helps the admissions committee immensely.
Sure, and for folks that may not be aware of the case that Jackie is referring to, the U.S. Supreme Court just made a second ruling on Fisher versus the University of Texas, and they reaffirmed the original decision. And as a part of these cases, this idea and this concept of being mission-driven, remains very important to the work of the university work around diversity, and that so having those kinds of those kinds of documents and pieces of language as a part, that language as a part of official kind of mission-driven documentation at an institution does provide also certainly some legal force there. So what kinds of training, and Linda mentioned Project Implicit from Harvard, which is a great resource for folks to just kind of go on and see where they where they fall. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but what kinds of training at Virginia, Maryland do you do for your members of your admissions committee?
So we do, we had actually McMaster's group who developed the multiple mini interviews. They came in the first year that we implemented the MMIs and did the training for us, which was wonderful that they did that. They're very well known within the medical education field and took the time to visit with us. And then when we began the holistic review process, we had a member from AAMC, which is our colleagues within medical education, come in and do the holistic training for our admissions committee. Prior to the multiple mini interviews, though, Jenny and I do all the interviewer training, and that is a mandatory training process for all of the stakeholders that come in to participate in those interviews.
Okay. And Linda, what kind of trainings do you offer your committee?
I mentioned about the implicit bias and all. We do in-person training. Everybody's required to either attend a training or because we have in the interview process, we do have some alumni that interviewed. They can also watch a podcast that we do. But everybody's required, and they sign off that they do, to either in person or via podcast watch both trainings for file review and trainings for interviews.
Okay, great. So do both of the institutions do, and I know that we've had some questions about, I guess, nuts and bolts in this. One of the things that DeBrew mentioned last week was this idea of full file review. And I know that both of your institutions get a lot of applications. So how do you manage the review process, I guess, from a technical aspect when you're getting, probably 1,000 applications for 100 seats or 165 seats at Ohio State? So how does that work? Linda, why don't we start with you? Because you have a lot of seats still.
So, we have a lot of people that file review. At this point, we're still transitioning. We do not review every single file, so we do use some cutoffs to decide on what people move to file review. But we do review a lot of files. And we've got a pretty good group that do it. Most people who participated have done it now for several years, take it very seriously. And so, but for us to even review the numbers that we do, it does take a pretty dedicated group of people to do it.
Sure. And how many applicants did you have last year?
We've been about the last 3 years. We've been at about 1,200 applicants.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a lot of work. So in Virginia, Jenny, Jackie, how many applicants did you have, and how close are you to kind of full file review?
So we had over 1,400 applicants last year, and we reviewed every single packet if it was complete, and I think almost all of them were. And we have 15 admissions committee members, and it's just a dedicated group, and we divide those applications up and do complete file reviews cover to cover.
Wow. So if we have any pre-vet students listening to this podcast, this is why it takes a while to get your letters. Right?
That's exactly right. And that's an excellent point, because we do, come down to the wire when we invite applicants for interviews, and that's exactly why, is because we take each applicant's story seriously.
Yeah. Sure. So we did have one question that was submitted in advance to the podcast, and that question related to the predictiveness of non-technical or the non-cognitive competencies in the application process. And so I know that the folks at Virginia, Maryland have kind of taken a look at this, and you've got a number of data to kind of talk about this. So can you talk about that question a little bit?
So Calgary actually was the first veterinary school in North America to implement the multiple mini interview. We were the second. Texas A&M was the third. And so we really have about 10 years of data regarding the multiple mini interview. We can certainly correlate some of those characteristics with students' performance within the clinical year. We don't have sufficient data at this point to talk about their life after graduation. But what we can say for our particular program is that we do see a direct correlation with assessment of their professionalism and ethical and moral judgment during the MMIs with those that with that assessment during the clinical year. And we certainly are looking into the other competencies as well, but that's what we have found so far.
So I think the question that was asked was about, they pointed out that the correlation with student success in veterinary school is the student's GPA in rigorous prerequisite science classes, and some of their GRE scores only mildly correlated. And that isn't surprising if you're looking at, it depends on what you define as success. So if you define as success in veterinary school, their GPA, whether it's years 1 through 3 or their whole GPAs for the 4 years, and you want to correlate that with something, it's not surprising that it correlates well. So test assessment correlates well with test assessment. But I guess we would argue you need to be thinking about success in different ways. And what makes a successful veterinary student, or more importantly, what makes a successful veterinarian, may not necessarily correlate with a GPA. So in some ways, it's a way of what your definition of success is, and how much you truly believe in, and maybe a broader, more diverse view of success, and then try and make those correlations. But as Jackie mentioned, they are not as easy to make as a correlation between a GPA pre-veterinary college and a GPA in veterinary college, which tend to correlate very well.
And Lisa, I think two things. One, I think it's been a big cultural, philosophical change here within our college community, and that might not work for another veterinary college, but we certainly have changed the way that we're defining what a successful student or a successful graduate might look like, and that has impacted our overall admissions process. So again, it's not something that might work for all programs, but it's been a conscious choice on our part to make that shift.
Those are some fantastic points, I think, in terms of redefining success, and I know that there's been a lot of work around that type of question in undergrad, and you know, it's kind of a well documented and kind of even anecdotal kind of fact around, you know, the BC student tends to outpace the straight A student over the lifetime of a career. So rock on for those students that you know seem to be underperforming, but it's certainly not. They have certainly other competencies that make up for those grades. So so Linda, what kinds of competencies, I guess, are both of your institutions looking for? So we know that you want good grades, right? And we know that those grades are predictive of future performance in terms of, I guess, quantitative assessment. But what are those other things that you may be looking for and using the admissions process to sort out?
Well, I think it's difficult, right? I think we look for qualities in leadership, we look for qualities in strong teamwork, we look for self-awareness. I mean, you know, some of these things are hard to get at, right? So you attempt them in admissions and then hope that they come through. But those translate out, I think, later in terms of how people do in a clinical environment. Yes, we want them to have strong medical knowledge, They need to have good technical skills, but I would argue that interpersonal skills and professionalism in the clinic are two of the most important things, and certainly things that we are evaluating in the clinical year. So as best we can, we're hopeful that some of the processes we have may look for things that would contribute to that in the clinical year, and then as Jenny and Jackie pointed out, most importantly is then how does that play out in their career? And I think we all struggle with evaluating that, partially because it's difficult to get strong response rates on alumni and employer surveys. That's something we all grapple with. So a much harder thing to look at our people, say, 5 and 10 years out.
Sure. So you're just 2 schools out of many around the world in our membership. What advice would you give to some of our other member institutions that are interested in kind of moving into a more holistic approach to admissions? So we'll start with Virginia, Maryland, and then as Linda, you guys are kind of right on the cusp of that. You're just really kind of starting down that path. So so we'll start with Jackie and Jenny. What advice as seasoned folks would you give to the newbies?
Well, I think some lessons learned is to engage stakeholders, including students and those out in the profession, to engage them in the process. Small steps in implementation. You need to have lots of discussion. Change can be painful, but change can be good, and you learn. And we want our students to be reflective practitioners. Well, we need to be that as well, and just always reflecting on the process, what worked, what didn't work. Be flexible and realize that things might not always work the way that you expect, but be willing to change and review the process every year. I think and specifically for us, it was the multiple mini interview process that we certainly have learned a lot from implementing that process, and it improves every year. Every year we learn something about not only our candidates but the process itself.
And then I think the other thing to that is being really trying to be critical about looking at the metrics, understanding that they sometimes take time to change and that they can vary, but you're trying to look for trends and really identify specific trends, and then trying to say, well, what is it that we did or what didn't we do to get it, trying to identify where is it we want to go to as well.
Good point. And so, Linda, on the very kind of front end of change, what advice would you give to your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, we've had change for a while, probably just a little bit of a different focus this year. I think no matter what you do, I think you're going to have buy-in from upper administration. So it's important, I think, for the dean to be on board. I think it's important for the admissions committee to know that. And ultimately, you want your faculty, right, to have buy-in. And that helps trickle down, and we have very strong support in our admissions process from our alumni, and that's been very, very helpful. We have students involved, so we have an enormous buy-in process, and I think that really helps create some continuity and people taking it seriously and helping it be successful.
Great. So, thinking, I guess, big picture, and thinking about reframing admissions as a hiring, kind of in a hiring paradigm, what kind of advice might you give? Oh yeah, I'm making you stretch now. What kind of advice might you give to your future employers of your graduates in terms of explaining how you select students, because I'm sure that they're certainly one of your biggest stakeholders, right? But also kind of your guidance to the profession at large as those future employers of your graduates, that they should be mindful about knowing that they need these folks that have really great clinical aptitude, but certainly encouraging them to look at other things as well. So any comments on that from anybody?
I actually think that's what employers are looking for. I think what we're doing in admissions actually supports the notion that I would argue that probably most of our employers, and if I talk about practitioners, yes, they want somebody with good clinical skills and good medical knowledge, but they also know that some of that is going to improve and be learned on the job. Harder to teach somebody to be ethical or professional or to be a strong communicator. And so if we do a good job in our process of trying to provide a well-rounded, well-balanced student, I think we are meeting actually the needs and the requirements of what our employers are looking for.
Good deal.
No, I think we would agree completely with Linda, and so yeah, that's I think what often they focus on when they're interviewing. The other thing is I think that, as Jackie was saying earlier, and I think that what Linda was saying is that we involve our stakeholders or our employers a lot, and so over the multiple years that we've been in many interviews, and we have 32 people interviewing at one time, so you can bring in a lot of practitioners, and so a lot of our Virginia and Maryland practitioners have experienced that process, and I think that helps them understand that they're the sort of characteristics that we're looking for, and I think that they're completely in support of that, and then know to look for those same characteristics potentially when they're hiring 4 years later.
Yeah. So one of the biggest questions I think that we hear when we talk about admissions is we are looking at the applicant pool. So and how do we diversify the pool so that there are more students, qualified students, to kind of look at and evaluate and potentially admit. So I'd kind of like to shift the focus a little bit and talk about recruitment, and find out what kinds of programs, whether they are summer enrichment programs, what kind of ages are you targeting, and how are you kind of reaching out in your respective states to kind of work on building pool. Certainly you have a lot of applicants, but is the pool really kind of what you want it to be currently? So who wants to take that first?
Well, recruitment is very important to our college, and the dean fully supports recruitment. To us, what recruitment means, though, is building relationships. And sometimes relationships just take a long time to develop. So these aren't candidates that we might meet one time. These are candidates that we might work with over years, and from from high school actually. We're very fortunate. We made a hire last year of an assistant director of admissions, Dr. Sitterly, and so we're able to target a wide age range. So working even from elementary now through undergrad. So that again, I think that's really helps our ability to attract more applicants. But that's really the number of applicants to us. Sure, it looks great, but that's not what's important to us. It's again those relationships that we develop with candidates.
And I think that we do try and target obviously a diverse group of people, because you can't get diversity unless you're targeting diversity or recruiting for diversity. So we do, sit down and look, how can we target people that are, or how can we get, as Jackie said, how can we develop relationships with a diverse group of people, and so that we're trying to equally target these various groups. We don't, focus most of our attention on the traditional people that get into veterinary medicine. We really try and identify groups that may be less traditionally likely to apply to veterinary medicine, and specifically try and target those groups so that we can increase that diversity.
She's frozen.
You're back, Lisa.
A minute here. Here we go. No, I can't seem to unmute you. Hold on. Are you speaking? There should be, sorry, we're having a little technical difficulties here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
So I think, for us, we suffer a lot of the same have the same challenges as most universities, right? Recruitment's very important, and how do you reach as many people as you can in that process? And we just finished our vet camp that we do in the summer. We had 49 high school students, most of them from a wide background, either underrepresented minorities, economic disadvantaged, socioeconomic, different geographic regions, and so that's an example of the kind of thing we do. Because we take a lot of out-of-state students, we certainly try to be at a lot of the conferences where we hope to meet a lot of different folks that we can talk to about Ohio State. But I think, as you know, and the work that AAVMC does, that really this is a challenge for us as a profession. It's not something that individual schools are going to solve on their own.
Sure. It is a challenge. So in the edited version of this podcast, certainly we will include a list of meetings that AAVMC participates in nationally across the country. Those meetings include SACNAS, which are mostly Latino students, ABCRAMs, mostly African American students, and these are students that are already in STEM programs. They are amazing students, and really just we've seen a huge increase in the number of students attending these meetings with an interest in veterinary medicine over probably the last decade. So it's really fantastic. So as we begin to wrap up, so what are those activities that you think have had the biggest impact, not only kind of in your admissions process, but kind of thinking about diversity in the larger scope of admissions? Certainly this is something that we talk about nationally at AAVMC meetings with my colleague Tony Wen, but what are some of the kind of big things that you think will make a big difference, and kind of what's on the horizon with respect to diversity in admissions?
Let me just start, and then I'm going to hand over to two people that are much more cold-faced than I am. I think that you really touched on a very important thing, Lisa, and also Linda alluded to it as well. It's about trying to develop a national strategy for increasing applications in general to veterinary medical education, but particularly diverse applications. And I'm sure that the AAVMC admissions group is working hard on this, but it's about again, seeking best practices, thinking more outside the box, thinking about other ways that we can be doing that. But I'm sure we're all aware and some a little bit concerned about the overall application numbers in veterinary medical education. So really to increase diversity, and it requires increased applications as well, and making sure that those applications, as I said, are diverse. And so I'm coming up with, I think, is a national strategy. I think would be one good step that we could work towards. What do you think about that, Jackie?
Well, I totally agree with that. I think that we encourage teamwork and team building with our students. That I would really like to see colleges begin working together and maybe sharing resources with one another in regards to recruitments. We work with several other colleges when we go out to recruit, and we're certainly willing to share things like booth space and any information that we can to recruit for the overall profession. I think there needs to be more scholarship in the area of student selection from the colleges. Again, just sharing best practices that we can use evidence-based student selection processes. Those are a few of the things that I would like to see in the future.
And then also too, continuing our discussion about holistic review, but also what what are the barriers or the things that can impact a college's inability to select a diverse population of students. And so some of the things that we do unconsciously that can have a significant impact on whether you can select a diverse group of students. And again, with more colleges trying to select for more diversity, then there will be a bigger impact overall in the profession.
Yeah. So again, we will include, sorry, we're getting a bit of echo back on this feedback on the podcast at the moment, but we will include links to various student organizations that have an emphasis on students of color in STEM. There are a number of them. They all have national meetings that you can definitely find the best and the brightest. The overall numbers of student or applicants to seats is a concern and a part of the national discussion on the future of the profession. The ratio of applicants to seats currently is 1.6 to 1, and my own research shows that, certainly I think that once we get past 1.5 or around 1.4 or so, we see a steep decline in the quality of applicants applying. So we really do need to focus on recruiting and building those long-term relationships. So any parting words from each of you? Linda, any parting words?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate, and I think all of the schools have great strengths of how they do admissions, so it's been nice to be able to share a few things that we do here.
Wonderful. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Jenny, Jackie, any parting words?
Again, I think Linda's absolutely right. I think all the veterinary schools here in the United States, worldwide, are just great programs, and that we all have different approaches, and just like a diverse learning environment, we can learn from one another in our current student selection process.
Wonderful. If you are watching or listening to this podcast after the fact, and you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to send them to diversitymatters@aavmc.org, and I will try to see if our speakers can field those questions after the fact, and we will make those answers available on a future podcast. So with that, I will wrap this show up. Thank you so much to our guests. I really appreciate it. This has been a great discussion, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.